My phone. Where the hell is my phone? William Carter stopped abruptly on the sidewalk and shoved a hand deep into the inside pocket of his dark coat. Nothing. His other pocket. Nothing. Damn it. No, no, no. He muttered, his calm billionaire composure suddenly gone. William opened his leather briefcase and flipped through the contents with quick, irritated movements. My phone! He barked again, turning toward a passing couple. Did anyone see a phone on the sidewalk? The couple looked startled. No. Sorry, the man said quickly before pulling his partner along. William ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That phone was right here, he muttered to himself. Inside that phone were things he never trusted to any cloud storage or assistant. Thousands of photographs, videos, memories. Every photo he had of the little girl he had lost years ago. Videos of her laughing, walking, learning to speak. His daughter, the one person he had never stopped searching for. William turned around again, scanning the pavement like a man looking for a dropped diamond. Excuse me, he said to a street vendor, slightly out of breath. Did you see a phone fall around here? Black phone? About this size? The vendor shook his head. Sorry, boss. William cursed under his breath. A few yards away, Annie Brooks stood quietly near the bus stop sign. The small black girl held the phone carefully in both hands. She had found it lying near the curb a few minutes earlier while walking home from school. At first, she thought someone nearby would come back for it, so she stayed where she was, waiting. The phone had lit up when she picked it up. The screen showed a photograph. Annie had looked at it curiously. The photo showed a man standing beside a smiling woman. The woman was pregnant, one hand resting gently on her stomach. The man stood beside her protectively, his arm around her shoulders. They looked happy. Annie studied the woman's face carefully, her brow wrinkled slightly. That looks like Mama, she whispered softly. Before she could think further, she heard someone approaching quickly. Excuse me. She looked up. A tall white man in a dark suit was walking toward her, scanning the ground as he moved. His expression was tense. Did you happen to see a phone around here? He asked quickly. Black phone. I dropped it somewhere nearby. Annie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held the phone a little tighter. Then she looked down at the screen again. The photograph was still there. The same man in the picture, standing beside her mother. Slowly, Annie lifted her eyes and studied the man in front of her. The same sharp jawline, the same eyes, the same hair. It was him. Her small fingers tightened instinctively around the phone. The man noticed the device in her hands almost immediately. Relief flooded his face. That's it, he said quickly. That's my phone. But Annie still didn't move. Instead, she asked carefully, what does your phone look like? William blinked, slightly surprised by the question. Well, he said, catching his breath. It's black. A little scratch on the corner here. He gestured with his hand. And the lock screen has a photo of my family. Annie's eyes widened slightly. Your family? William nodded. Yes. He hesitated for a moment. There's a picture of my wife and our baby girl before she was born. Annie slowly turned the screen toward him. This one? William froze. The photograph staring back at him was exactly the same one. The same picture he had kept for 6 years. The same memory he opened every night before going to sleep. His hand trembled slightly as he reached forward. Yes, he whispered. That's it. Annie held the phone out to him. But as William took it, something else caught his eye. A flash of silver on the girl's small hand. His fingers stopped halfway. The ring. A thin silver band resting loosely on Annie's finger. William's entire body went still, because he knew that ring. He knew every tiny mark on its surface. It had belonged to his grandmother once, and 6 years ago, he had placed it into the hand of the woman he loved, Lena Brooks. William slowly lifted his gaze from the ring to the girl's face. She watched him curiously. Mister? She asked. His voice came out quieter now. Where did you get that ring? Annie glanced down at her hand. Oh, my mama gave it to me. William felt his chest tighten. My mama says it belonged to someone important once, Annie continued. Then she added softly, the man who was supposed to come back. William could barely breathe. What's your name? He asked. The girl smiled. Annie Brooks. The name hit him like thunder. Brooks, the name he had been searching for all these years. Annie pointed across the street toward a small diner with wide windows and a faded red sign above the door. My mom works there, she said. William followed her finger. Inside the diner, behind the counter, a woman stood pouring coffee for an elderly couple. Her hair was longer now, her shoulders slightly thinner. but William Carter would have recognized her anywhere. Lena Brooks, the woman he had lost, and the little girl standing in front of him, wearing the ring he once gave away, was his daughter. William Carter did not realize he had stopped breathing until Annie tilted her head slightly and asked, "Mister, are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, the careful tone children use when they sense something strange in an adult's behavior. William forced himself to inhale slowly. The air felt heavy in his chest, as if the city itself had pressed against him. He looked down at the small girl standing in front of him. The ring, that silver ring still rested on her finger, catching the late afternoon light. And across the street, through the diner window, Lena Brooks moved behind the counter, unaware that the past had just walked back into her life. William swallowed. Then another thought struck him suddenly. He looked back at Annie. "Can I ask you something?" Annie nodded politely. "Yes, sir." William lifted the phone slightly in his hand. "When you found this, why didn't you leave?" The question came out softer than he expected. Most people in Manhattan would have picked up a lost phone, glanced around for 10 seconds, then kept walking. Some might have even slipped it into a pocket and considered it their lucky day. But Annie had stayed and found the owner. She shifted her backpack on her shoulders and looked at the phone again. "Well," she said slowly, thinking through her answer the way children often do, "because it didn't look like someone meant to lose it." William frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the screen. "The picture." William glanced down at the lock screen, the same photograph he had carried for 6 years. Him, Lena, her pregnant belly between them. Annie continued, speaking with simple honesty. "The people in the picture looked happy." William felt something tighten in his chest. "So I thought," Annie went on. "Whoever dropped the phone would probably come back looking for it." She shrugged lightly. "And I didn't want them to be sad." William blinked. Of all the answers he expected, that had not been one of them. "Most people wouldn't wait," he said quietly. Annie looked a little surprised by that. "They wouldn't?" He shook his head slowly. "Probably not." She considered that for a moment. "Well, Mama says if something isn't yours, you shouldn't keep it." William almost smiled. That sounded exactly like Lena. The same quiet sense of right and wrong. The same stubborn honesty that had once drawn him to her when everyone else in his world spoke in half-truths and polite lies. He looked down again at Annie. "You were going to stand here until the owner came back?" "Yes, sir. And if I hadn't, I was going to bring it to the police station," she said, pointing down the block. "Mama showed me where it is." William followed her finger briefly before looking back at her. "You're very responsible." Annie shrugged again. "I'm the one who found it." Then she tilted her head slightly and studied him again with open curiosity. "You were really scared when you were looking for it." William let out a small breath. "Yes," he admitted. "Because of the pictures?" He nodded. "Yes." Annie's eyes drifted back to the phone. "There's a lot of pictures," she said thoughtfully. William felt his throat tighten. "I know. I saw the baby ones," she added carefully. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he said softly, "Those are very important to me." "Is she your daughter?" Annie asked. William looked at her. Something in the question made time slow down again. "Yes," he said quietly. Annie nodded slowly, as if confirming something in her own mind. "She looks very happy in the photos." William turned his gaze toward the diner window again. Lena stood behind the counter, laughing softly with an elderly man sitting on the stool. The movement was familiar, painfully familiar. "She was," he said. Annie followed his gaze. "That's my mama," she said. William nodded. "Yes. She works a lot." He didn't answer right away. "I can see that." Annie looked back at him. "Sometimes she's really tired when we get home," she said matter-of-factly. "But she still reads stories before bed." William closed his eyes briefly. Every word Annie spoke felt like a piece of a life he should have lived. "Do you live nearby?" he asked gently. "Over there," Annie pointed down the block. "The building with the broken mailbox." William looked in that direction, imagining it. A small apartment, a noisy heater, second-hand furniture, and Lena raising their daughter alone. The weight of that truth pressed against him harder than any accusation ever could. Annie suddenly asked, "Do you know my mama?" William hesitated. "Yes," he said slowly. "A long time ago." Her eyes moved back to the phone in his hand. "The lady in the picture really looks like my mama." William nodded. "She does. Why do you have that picture?" William looked at the photograph again. He remembered the exact day it had been taken. A summer afternoon, Riverside Park. Lena laughing as the wind lifted her hair, his arm around her shoulders. their future standing between them, because she believed he would be there when their child was born. His voice came out quieter than before. Because once, your mama and I were very happy. Annie studied him carefully. Then she asked the one question no adult had ever dared ask him. Did something bad happen? William felt the truth sitting heavy behind his ribs. Yes, he said, and then Annie lifted her hand again, the silver ring catching the sunlight. My mama said this ring came from someone who made a promise, she said softly. William stared at it. The memory of a train station flooded back into him. Cold air, a suitcase, Lena waiting. Yes, he said quietly. Did he break the promise? Annie asked. William met her eyes. Yes. She was silent for a moment. Then she said something that made his chest ache. Maybe he couldn't get there. William looked toward the diner window again. At the woman, he had failed. No, he said softly. He could have. If this moment touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that matter. At that exact moment, Lena turned toward the window. Her eyes lifted, and for the first time in 6 years, she saw him standing on the sidewalk beside her daughter. Lena Brooks did not drop the coffee pot in her hand. For one suspended second, William thought she might. Her fingers tightened around the handle. Her shoulders went rigid, and the color seemed to drain slowly from her face. But she did not stumble. She did not gasp. She did not make a scene. That had always been Lena's way. When life broke something inside her, she held herself still first and bled later. Through the diner window, her eyes locked on William's. He saw the recognition arrive in waves. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something colder, something heavier. A pain so old it no longer needed drama to make itself known. Annie looked up at him, then back toward the diner. That's my mama, she said again, this time in a smaller voice, as if she sensed the air had changed. William could not answer. He had stood before senators, investors, hostile boards, and reporters looking for blood. None of that had prepared him for the sight of Lena Brooks staring at him through glass with 6 years of silence between them. Inside the diner, one of the older customers turned slightly on his stool, noticing that Lena had stopped moving. Lena? The man asked. You all right, honey? She did not answer him right away. Her eyes remained on William. Then, with a slowness that hurt to watch, she set the coffee pot down on the warmer beside the register and wiped her hands once on the white towel tucked into her apron. She said something to the other waitress, a stocky woman with kind eyes and silver hair pinned back neatly. The woman followed Lena's gaze to the window, then to William, then to Annie, standing at his side. Her expression sharpened with instant protective suspicion. William felt Annie shift beside him. Mister, she asked softly, do you want to come in? He looked down at her. Before he could answer, the diner door opened. Lena stepped outside. The sounds of the street returned all at once. Horns, engines, a delivery cart rattling over uneven pavement, distant music from a passing car, but William heard them as though from underwater. Lena stood only a few feet away now. She wore a pale blue diner uniform with her name stitched above the pocket. Her hair was pulled back, though loose strands had escaped around her face. She looked tired, not weak, not defeated. Just tired in the way life makes honest people tired when it has used them hard. For a moment, no one spoke. Annie looked from one adult to the other, curious and alert. Finally, Lena's gaze dropped to the phone in William's hand, then to Annie, then back to him. You found your owner, she said to Annie, but her eyes never left William's face. Annie nodded. He was looking everywhere. I can imagine, Lena replied. The calm in her voice was more frightening than anger would have been. William opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lena crossed her arms. That must be a first, she said quietly. William Carter with no words. He swallowed. Lena, just her name on his tongue felt like reopening a wound he had deserved to keep. She gave a small, humorless laugh. No, she said. Don't start with my name like it gets to mean something because you still remember it. Annie looked up at her mother. Mama, he knows you. Lena took a breath, forcing herself softer when she answered her daughter. Yes, baby, I can see that. Annie frowned slightly. And he has your picture in his phone. The one when you were gonna have me. The sentence hung in the air between them. Lena's eyes flicked toward the screen William still held. For a brief second, her expression cracked. He saw memory move through her like pain. Then she looked at Annie's hand, at the ring, A change came over her face. "Annie," she said gently, "go inside and sit with Miss Carla for a minute." The girl did not move. "But Mama, just for a minute, sweetheart." Annie hesitated, looking at William once more. There was no fear in her eyes, only confusion. Then she handed Lena her workbook, adjusted her backpack, and went inside. The silver-haired waitress opened the door for her and put a hand on her shoulder as the little girl passed. Now only William and Lena remained on the sidewalk, close enough to touch, separated by 6 years and every wrong thing he had done. Lena kept her arms folded, not for warmth but for distance. He noticed she had grown thinner, the sharp lines of survival written into the structure of her face. But her eyes were exactly the same, dark, steady, impossible to lie to. "She's 6, William said, because it was the only thing he could say that was true enough to stand on. Lena's jaw tightened. "Yes." He looked toward the diner window where Annie had climbed onto a stool beside the counter and was talking quietly to the older waitress. "She's mine," he said. It was not a question. Not after the ring. Not after the photo on his phone reflected back at him through her face. Lena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't get to say that like you earned it." The words landed clean and hard. William accepted them because he had no defense. "I know," he said. She studied him, perhaps listening for arrogance, excuse, or pity. Whatever she expected, she did not seem to find it. "You disappeared," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just plainly. Like naming weather. William looked down for a moment, then back at her. "I know. No phone call. I know. No letter. No message. Nothing." Each sentence struck like a measured blow. "I know," he said again, and this time his voice nearly failed him. Lena's eyes shone, but no tears fell. "That night," she said, "I stood in Penn Station until they turned off half the lights. I stood there with one suitcase and that ring in my pocket, and I told myself every 5 minutes you'd come running around the corner." She laughed once, small and broken. "Do you know how long a woman can lie to herself when she loves someone?" William's throat burned. He remembered that night with a different kind of prison wrapped around it. His father's voice, the locked study door, the phone ripped from his hand, 2 men from family security outside the hall as if he were some reckless boy instead of a grown man trying to choose love over obedience. But none of that had changed what Lena lived through. "I tried to get there," he said at last. The words sounded thin. Lena looked at him with exhausted disbelief. "Did you?" "Yes." "How?" The question stopped him, not because there was no answer, but because every answer came too late. "My father found out," he said. "He had my phone taken. He locked me in the house. By morning I was on a plane to London." Lena stared at him. For the first time since stepping outside, real surprise moved across her face. Not forgiveness, not softness, only surprise. William kept going because if he stopped now, he never would again. "I came back 3 days later," he said. "I went to your apartment. It was empty. I checked with the landlord. No forwarding address. I went to your studio in Harlem. They said you'd left. After that I hired people to help me find you." Lena's expression hardened again. "And yet somehow," she said, "I still raised her alone." There was no answer to that except shame. The autumn wind moved between them, carrying the scent of coffee and wet pavement. Across the street a cyclist cursed at a cab. Somewhere a church bell began to strike the hour. William looked through the diner window again. Annie was laughing at something Miss Carla had said, one small hand moving as she talked. The sight pierced him with such sudden force that he had to steady himself. "I've seen videos of her," he said quietly. "A few. Over the years." Lena's eyes narrowed. "What?" He forced himself to be honest. "Not from you. From things people posted. A school page once. A neighbor's birthday video. I know that sounds terrible." "It does. I know." She watched him with something unreadable now. Not trust, not even anger alone. The stunned recalculation of a woman discovering that the man she buried in her mind had not buried her at all. William looked back at her. "Lena," he said, voice low and stripped bare. "I never stopped looking." For the first time, her composure wavered. Only slightly. Only enough for him to see the tired woman beneath the armor. Then she straightened again. "You don't get a medal for searching for the family you failed to protect," she said. "No," he replied. "I don't." A long silence passed between them. Inside the diner, Annie turned toward the window. Her eyes found them instantly. William saw the question in her face, the hope, the uncertainty, the child's instinct to understand where she belonged before anyone had the courage to explain it. Lena followed his gaze and exhaled slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Don't say anything to her yet." William looked at her. "She knows something," he said. "She knows there's a man with her mother in a picture." Lena answered, "That is not the same thing as knowing who you are." He nodded. She took one step back toward the door. "I'm working until 6. The words startled him. Not because they were kind, because they were not dismissal. "If you're still here," Lena said, "we'll talk." William stared at her, hardly trusting what he'd heard. Lena opened the diner door, then paused without turning around. "She deserves the truth," she said. A beat passed. "But truth has a cost, William. And if you step into her life now, you don't get to vanish when it becomes inconvenient." Then she went inside, leaving him on the sidewalk with his phone in his hand, his daughter only a few feet away beyond the glass, and the first real chance he had ever been given to answer for the worst night of his life. The diner door closed softly behind Lena, but the echo of her words remained with William Carter long after she disappeared back inside. "If you're still here, we'll talk." For a man who had spent 6 years chasing shadows across cities and databases, those 5 words felt heavier than any courtroom verdict. William remained on the sidewalk for a moment, his hand still wrapped around the phone Annie had returned to him. The screen had gone dark again, reflecting only his own face back at him, older, more tired than he remembered. Across the street, a taxi honked impatiently. A man shouted for someone to hold the elevator door in the building next to the diner. The ordinary noise of New York continued as if nothing had happened, but everything had happened. William exhaled slowly and crossed the street. Inside the diner, the warmth hit him first. The smell of coffee, butter, and grilled bread filled the air. The place was small but comfortable. The kind of neighborhood spot where people greeted each other by name and no one stayed a stranger for long. Miss Carla, the silver-haired waitress, looked up immediately when the door opened. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she saw William. She had the protective posture of someone who had watched Lena struggle long enough to distrust men in expensive suits. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, though the tone suggested she was already deciding whether he belonged there. Before William could answer, Annie spotted him. "There he is," she said brightly, hopping down from the stool. She hurried over, braids bouncing with each step. "You came inside." William managed a small smile. "You told me your mom works here." Annie nodded proudly. "Best pancakes in the neighborhood." Miss Carla snorted quietly behind the counter. "That's right," she said. "And we don't give business to folks who make trouble." William glanced toward Lena. She was moving between tables again, carrying plates to customers as if nothing unusual had happened outside. But he noticed the stiffness in her shoulders. She was aware of him every second. Annie tugged lightly at William's sleeve. "Do you want to sit?" He hesitated. This was not the kind of place a billionaire usually sat unnoticed. His suit alone probably cost more than the diner's weekly coffee supply. But he nodded. "Yes." Annie led him to the counter stool she had just left. Miss Carla approached with a menu but did not hand it over yet. "You passing through?" she asked carefully. "Or staying a while?" William understood the question was not really about food. He met her eyes respectfully. "I'm waiting for Lena to finish her shift." Miss Carla studied him for a long moment. Then she set the menu down. "Coffee?" "Yes, ma'am." Her eyebrow lifted slightly at the politeness. "Well," she muttered, pouring a cup. "At least somebody raised you right." William almost smiled. Annie climbed back onto the stool beside him. "You look less scared now," she said. William glanced down at her. "I suppose I do. You were really worried about that phone." He nodded slowly. "I was." Annie tapped the counter thoughtfully. "My mama says grown-ups panic about strange things." "That sounds like Lena," he said quietly. The name slipped out before he could stop it. Annie looked pleased. "You say her name like you know her." William stared into his coffee for a moment. "I used to." Annie tilted her head. "Before me?" The directness of children always caught him off guard. "Yes." "Were you friends?" William let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "Yes," he said softly. "Something like that." Across the room, Lena placed a check on a table and thanked the elderly couple who had been sitting there earlier. When they stood to leave, the man patted her arm kindly. "You take care now, Lena," he said. She nodded and forced a small smile. But when she turned, her eyes moved immediately to William sitting beside Annie. William felt that look like pressure against his chest. Annie noticed it too. My mama's watching us, she whispered. I know. Did you do something bad? William didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, yes. Annie considered that honestly. Did you say sorry? Not yet. Well, she said matter-of-factly, Mama likes when people say sorry. Miss Carla chuckled quietly behind the counter. Kid's not wrong. William lifted the coffee cup but didn't drink. His eyes drifted to the phone in his hand again. The screen lit briefly when his thumb brushed it. The photograph appeared. Him, Lena, a moment frozen in sunlight 6 years earlier. Annie leaned closer to look. That's the picture I saw. William nodded. Yes, you both look really happy. We were. Annie traced the air above the screen with one finger. Careful not to touch it. Why did you keep the picture? The question was simple, but the answer held the weight of 6 lost years. Because, William said quietly, it reminds me of who I was supposed to be. Annie looked puzzled. Were you different? Yes. How? He looked at her. I was someone who thought love was enough. She seemed to consider that deeply. Then she shrugged. Love is good. Yes, William said softly. It is. At that moment, Lena approached the counter. Miss Carla gave her a look that said everything without words. Lena nodded slightly. She placed Annie's workbook in front of her. Homework done? Yes, Mama. Good. Then Lena turned to William. Up close, the distance between them felt even heavier. Shift ends in 10 minutes, she said. William nodded. I'll wait. Their eyes held for a moment. Not lovers. Not strangers. Something complicated and unfinished. Annie looked between them curiously. Are we all going somewhere? She asked. Lena rested a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Maybe, she said. William's heart tightened slightly, because for the first time in 6 years, the future had opened just enough for him to see the possibility of walking into it. And that possibility was standing beside him on a diner stool, swinging her legs and humming softly while the evening lights of New York began to glow outside the window. By the time Lena untied her apron, the diner had thinned out to its evening quiet. The rush was over. Only 2 customers remained, an older couple sharing a slice of pie near the window, and a young delivery driver stirring sugar into a coffee he looked too tired to finish. The overhead lights cast a warm yellow glow across the counter, softening the worn edges of the room. William had not moved from his stool. He sat with both hands around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching the door to the kitchen, the register, the reflection in the window. Anything except the one thing he was most afraid to face directly. Annie sat beside him with her workbook open, carefully printing out spelling words in a round, determined hand. Every now and then she glanced up at him, then back down again, as if she still hadn't decided what to make of the man who knew her mother's smile before she did. Miss Carla came over with the check pad tucked under one arm and gave William a long look. You still here? She said. Yes, ma'am. She sniffed softly, then glanced toward the back where Lena had disappeared to clock out. Well, guess we'll see whether that's brave or foolish. Annie looked up. Can't it be both? Miss Carla barked out a laugh, surprising even herself. William smiled despite the tight knot in his chest. A minute later, Lena emerged from the back room wearing a wool coat over her sweater, a canvas tote on one shoulder. She had changed out of the diner uniform, but the tiredness in her face remained. She looked like a woman who had been carrying too much for too long and had forgotten what it felt like to set anything down. Annie, she said gently, zip your backpack. Annie obeyed at once. Are we going home? In a minute. Then Lena turned to William. The room seemed to shrink. I don't want to do this in front of everyone, she said quietly. William rose from the stool. Of course. Miss Carla dried a mug with deliberate slowness but said nothing. Her silence made it clear that if this conversation went badly, William would not make it to the sidewalk without being thrown there by moral force alone. Lena nodded toward a small booth at the far end of the diner, half hidden from the street by a pillar and an old rotating pie case. Sit. William slid into one side of the booth. Lena sat across from him. Annie started to climb in beside her mother, but Lena touched her hand. Sweetheart, stay with Miss Carla for just a little while. Annie frowned. Why? Because grown-ups need to talk. Annie looked from Lena to William, curiosity bright in her eyes. About the picture? A long beat passed. Lena's voice softened. Yes. About the picture. Annie seemed to accept that. Miss Carla called her over to help stack jelly packets, and she hopped down from the booth, though not without one last glance at William. When she was out of earshot, silence settled between them. William had rehearsed this moment in his mind for years. Explanations, apologies, facts, regret. But now that Lena sat in front of him, looking at him with that same steady gaze that had once made honesty unavoidable, every prepared word felt useless. She saved him from choosing wrong. "Start with the truth," she said. He nodded once. "My father found out about the train." Lena's face did not change. "He had men watching me by then. I didn't know it at the time, but he must have suspected something after I moved money into a private account. That night, before I could leave, he had my phone taken and locked me in the study." Her eyes stayed on him, unreadable. "I fought him," William said. "I shouted. I broke a lamp. 2 security men stood outside the door until morning." Lena's fingers tightened around the strap of her tote bag, but she said nothing. "In the morning," he continued, "my father gave me a choice. Go to London with the company delegation and let the story die, or lose everything and still never make it to you in time. He already knew where you lived. He made it clear he could make things worse for you if I pushed him." That made something flicker across her face. Not softness, not belief exactly, but recognition of the Carter family's reach. William leaned forward slightly. "I should have found another way. I know that. I should have broken a window, walked out, called the police, done something bigger, faster, louder. I know what I should have done." Lena let out a slow breath. "But you didn't." "No." The word sat between them like a sentence. William looked down at his hands. "When I got back from London, I went straight to your apartment." She laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. "You were too late." "Yes. I waited all night." He closed his eyes briefly. He could see it too clearly, her standing beneath the harsh station lights. Suitcase by her side, one hand over the child he had not yet met, searching every face that came through those doors. "When I got to your building," he said, "the landlord told me you'd left. No address, no forwarding information. Your phone was disconnected. The studio in Harlem said you had packed up your supplies. I had to disappear," Lena said. "Do you know what it feels like to be pregnant, alone, and certain that a family with money would rather erase you than acknowledge you?" William lifted his eyes to hers. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know now." Her jaw tightened. "No. You know pieces. I know the whole cost." He didn't argue. That was one of the changes 6 years had made in him. The younger William would have defended himself with intention, with context, with the desperate arrogance of a man who believed explanation could soften consequence. The man sitting here knew better. "I worked in Baltimore first," Lena said after a moment, as if surprising herself by continuing. "Then Philadelphia. Then back to New York because it was the only place big enough to disappear in. I took whatever jobs I could get. Waitressing, cleaning offices, home care. I had Annie and kept moving because I didn't trust your family not to find us before you did." William felt the shame rise in him again, hot and useless. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though even as he spoke he knew how hollow it sounded. Lena stared at him. "Tell you what? That I was tired? That I was scared? That your child had your eyes when she got serious?" Her voice dropped lower. "Tell you through what phone, William? To what address? To which version of the man who didn't come?" He took the blow because he deserved it. Across the diner, Annie laughed at something Miss Carla said. The sound drifted toward them like sunlight through a cracked door. Both of them turned instinctively toward it. Lena's expression changed first. Some of the hardness left her face when she looked at her daughter. It did not vanish. It simply made room for love. William saw then what 6 years had built in his absence. Not just survival, a whole world. Routines, rules, private jokes, bedtime stories, school pickups, soup when she was sick, a mother's hand at the back of a small coat in winter. All the invisible architecture of childhood, built by Lena alone. He looked back at her. "I have watched her grow in scraps," he admitted. Lena's head turned sharply. "What does that mean?" "I mean I found pieces. Public things. A school newsletter, a neighbor's birthday video online, a church holiday page once." He swallowed. "I know how wrong that sounds. It sounds like spying. Maybe it was," he said. "But it was all I had." She stared at him for a long moment, and this time the silence felt different. Still painful, but less certain, as if she were trying to decide whether his honesty made him more dangerous or simply more broken. "And the phone?" she asked at last. "Why panic like that?" William glanced down at the device resting beside his hand. "Because that's where I keep everything I found," he said. "Photos, videos, the picture of us. Every piece of her I was able to save." Lena's face went still. "You kept them?" "Yes." "Why?" The answer came easier than anything else had. "Because I didn't deserve a place in her life," he said. "But I couldn't survive pretending she wasn't in the world." For the first time since sitting down, Lena looked away, out toward the window, toward the darkening street, toward whatever place in herself still remembered the boy who once held her face in both hands and promised the world would not win. When she spoke again, her voice was tired. "She asks about her father sometimes." William's heart stopped. He did not move. "She didn't when she was little," Lena said. "Not really. But this past year she started noticing. Other kids have dads at school pickup, at the winter pageant, on weekends." Lena folded her hands together on the table. "I told her he was someone who made a promise and didn't keep it." William nodded once. "That was fair." "No," Lena said quietly. "It was kinder than the truth." The words hit him harder than anger. Miss Carla called across the diner. "Lena, honey, I'm locking up in 10. Lena lifted a hand without looking away from William. Then, after a long silence, she said the thing he had not dared hope to hear. "You can walk us home." He stared at her. Lena's eyes were steady again, but now there was something else in them. Not forgiveness, not welcome. A test. "You will say nothing to Annie tonight except that you knew me a long time ago," she said. "You will not confuse her. You will not make promises. And you will not disappear after this conversation like it never happened." "I won't." She held his gaze a second longer, measuring the weight of that answer. Then she stood and called softly, "Annie, baby, get your coat." Annie came hurrying over, cheeks pink with warmth, backpack bouncing. "Are we going home?" Lena nodded. Then Annie looked at William with open curiosity. "Is he coming with us?" Lena reached for her daughter's hand. "Yes," she said. "He's walking with us." The evening air outside the diner carried the faint chill of early autumn when the three of them stepped onto the sidewalk. New York was changing colors. The trees along the avenue had begun turning gold, and dry leaves scraped softly across the pavement whenever a taxi rushed past. Annie skipped one step ahead of them, swinging her backpack lightly against her shoulders. William walked beside Lena in silence. For several moments none of them spoke. The city filled the quiet car engines, distant sirens, laughter from a group outside a corner bar. Annie finally turned around and began walking backwards so she could face them. "So," she said brightly, "do you live around here too?" William almost smiled. "No," he said gently. "Not nearby." "Where then?" Lena gave him a quick look, reminding him without words to be careful. "Downtown," he answered simply. Annie nodded as if that explained everything. "Is your job important?" William chuckled softly. "Sometimes people think it is." "What do you do?" Before he could answer, Lena said calmly, "Mr. Carter works with computers." Annie's eyes widened. "Like games?" William shook his head. "More like the systems that make computers talk to each other." Annie thought about that very seriously. "That sounds boring." Lena hid a smile. William laughed quietly, the first real laugh that had escaped him all day. "You may be right." They turned onto a quieter residential street where the traffic noise faded into a distant hum. Apartment buildings stood close together, their windows glowing with warm yellow lights. Families were inside eating dinner, watching television, living ordinary lives. William noticed Annie slowing her steps to stay beside him. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes?" "You really looked scared when you lost your phone." He nodded. "I was. Was it because of the pictures?" "Yes." She studied his face carefully. "You must love your daughter a lot." The words landed softly but deeply. William glanced briefly at Lena before answering. "Yes," he said. "I do." Annie seemed satisfied with that answer. "Good," she said. Lena's apartment building stood halfway down the block. It was an older brownstone with chipped paint near the doorway and a mailbox panel that had clearly been repaired several times. Annie ran ahead and pushed open the front door. "Come on." Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and radiator heat. A staircase rose steeply along one wall, its railing polished smooth by decades of hands. They climbed 2 flights. Annie reached the door first and pulled a key from the small pocket of her backpack. I got it. Lena watched her unlock the door with the quiet pride of a mother who had raised a capable child. The apartment was small but neat. A couch with a crocheted blanket draped over the back. A narrow kitchen table with 2 chairs. Crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. A bookshelf filled with worn children's stories. William stood just inside the doorway, taking it all in with the strange feeling of a man stepping into a life he should have known by heart. Annie tossed her backpack onto the couch. "Mama, can I have juice?" "Yes, but only 1 glass," Lena said. Annie hurried into the kitchen. William remained near the door. He felt like a visitor in a sacred place. Lena set her tote bag down and turned to face him. "This is where we live," she said. "I can see that." Her voice softened slightly. "It's not much." William shook his head immediately. "It's everything." For a moment, Lena studied him. Then she nodded toward the couch. "You can sit." He did. Annie returned with a cup of apple juice and climbed onto the couch beside him. "You can see my drawings if you want," she offered. "I'd like that." She grabbed a stack of papers from the coffee table. "This one is my school. This one is Mama at work. And this one," she paused proudly, "is a rocket ship." William examined each drawing carefully. "They're very good." Annie beamed. While she talked, Lena stood quietly in the kitchen doorway watching them, watching William listen, watching the way Annie leaned slightly toward him when she spoke. It was a small thing, but Lena noticed. Finally, Annie yawned. Lena checked the clock. "Bedtime," Annie groaned. "But Mama, no arguing tonight." She turned to William. "You can stay while I put her to bed." William nodded. Annie looked between them curiously. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" she asked him. The question hung in the air. William felt Lena's eyes on him immediately. Waiting, measuring. He chose his words carefully. "I hope so." Annie accepted that easily. "Okay, Lena guided her down the short hallway toward the bedroom. A few minutes later, the apartment grew quiet. William sat alone in the living room. The sounds of bedtime drifted softly down the hall. Water running, a story being read, a child laughing sleepily. It was the most ordinary sound in the world, and it nearly broke his heart. When Lena finally returned, she leaned against the doorway for a moment. She fell asleep fast. William stood. The room felt smaller now, more serious. "Thank you for letting me walk you home," he said. Lena crossed her arms. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." A long silence followed. Then Lena asked the question she had been holding back all evening. "What happens now?" William looked toward the hallway where Annie slept, then back at Lena. "That depends on what you're willing to allow." Her eyes searched his face. "And if I say you stay away?" The question was not cruel, just honest. William answered just as honestly. "Then I stay away." Lena studied him for a long moment. Finally, she said quietly, "But you'd keep looking." William did not hesitate. "Yes." Lena nodded slowly. She had expected that answer, and somehow it frightened her less than she thought it would. Lena did not answer right away. She stood in the middle of the living room with one arm folded across her waist, the other hanging loose at her side, as if she had not yet decided whether to send William Carter out into the hallway or ask him to sit back down. The apartment was quiet now except for the soft rattle of the old heater and the occasional hum of traffic below the window. Annie was asleep at the end of the short hall. One small life, breathing steadily in the next room. Unaware that the shape of her future had begun shifting before bedtime, William waited. He had learned enough that afternoon to understand silence was not always refusal. Sometimes, with Lena, silence meant the truth had reached a place words could not. Finally, she walked past him into the kitchen and turned on the small lamp above the sink. "You want another coffee?" she asked. The question was so ordinary it nearly undid him. "Yes," he said quietly. "If you're having one, I'm not." She opened the cabinet anyway and took down a mug. "But you look like you need one." William sat back down at the table while Lena filled the kettle. He watched the small, familiar rhythm of her movements and felt the strange ache of seeing how self-contained her life had become. She did not need help opening jars. She did not need anyone to remember where the cups were kept or which burner ran hot. She had built a world that worked without him. That truth humbled him more than accusation ever could. On the refrigerator door, beneath Annie's spelling list and a school flyer for Fall Book Fair week, a few photographs were held up by magnets shaped like apples. William's eyes found them almost immediately. Annie, in a paper crown at what looked like a school play. Annie standing in front of a Christmas tree in red pajamas. Annie on a playground slide with her braids flying back behind her. Lena in the corner of one photo, smiling tiredly, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. William rose without thinking and stepped closer. Lena noticed where he was looking. "That's all from the past 2 years," she said as the kettle warmed. Anything older got ruined in a move when a pipe burst. He touched nothing. He only looked. In the Christmas picture, Annie was maybe 4. In the school photo, she was missing a front tooth. In every frame, she looked bright, watchful, loved. "You kept everything," he said. Lena gave a short, tired laugh. "That's what mothers do." The kettle began to whisper. She poured water into the mug and set it in front of him before taking the chair across from his. For a moment, neither spoke. William wrapped both hands around the coffee as if warmth might steady him. Lena sat with her fingers linked together on the tabletop, no longer hiding behind motion or work. Here, in her own apartment with her daughter asleep down the hall, there was nowhere for either of them to retreat into politeness. "I need you to understand something before this goes any further," she said. William nodded. "If Annie knows the truth, it changes the ground under her feet. Children pretend to adjust faster than they do. They look fine. And then 2 weeks later they cry in the grocery store because the wrong cereal is gone." Lena held his gaze. "So if you step in carefully." "I will." She asks questions in layers. First the small one, then the real one later when you think she's moved on. "I understand." "No," Lena said, not unkindly. "You don't. But you need to listen like you do." William accepted that too. He sipped the coffee. It was strong and a little burnt, and perfect for the moment. Lena looked toward the hallway once before speaking again. She started asking about her father last winter. William set the mug down slowly. What did she ask? The same thing every child asks in different words. Lena's expression softened with memory and pain together. Why doesn't everybody's family look the same? Why does Jonah have 2 houses? Why does Mia's dad pick her up on Fridays? Why is it always just us? William's chest tightened. I told her families come in all kinds of shapes. That was true. It was. Lena agreed. But it wasn't enough. She looked at him steadily. Eventually, she asked if her father was dead. The words hit him so hard he had to look away. What did you say? That no, he wasn't dead. Lena paused, and then she asked if that was better or worse. William closed his eyes for a moment. In the next room, Annie shifted faintly in her sleep. The tiny rustle traveled through the apartment like a verdict. Lena continued, her voice low now. I never told her you were a villain. I never told her you were rich. I never told her your family wanted us erased. Her mouth tightened. I told her there was a man who made a promise and failed to keep it. William looked back at her. You were kinder than I deserved. I wasn't doing it for you, Lena said. I was doing it for her. Children build themselves out of what they think their parents are. I wasn't going to let her think she was half made of cruelty. The sentence stayed with him. Children build themselves out of what they think their parents are. He felt, suddenly, and with startling force, the entire moral weight of fatherhood. Not as biology, not as a title, but as a shape inside a child's imagination. A man could fail there long before he ever failed in person. I don't want her to inherit my absence, he said quietly. Lena's eyes flickered. That, more than anything else he had said tonight, seemed to reach her. She leaned back in the chair and studied him for a long time. You've changed. The words came without warmth, but without bitterness too. Almost like an observation she didn't yet trust. I had to, William said. Because of me? Because of what I did to you. He paused, and because every year that passed made it harder to recognize the man who let it happen. Lena's gaze moved to the dark window over his shoulder. Her reflection floated there faintly, superimposed over the city lights outside. My mother used to say a person's true character shows up when they're asked to lose something, she said softly. Anyone can be good when being good costs nothing. William listened. She meant money, pride, comfort, reputation. The things people cling to when love starts demanding proof. The old heater clicked, then hissed again. William thought of his father's townhouse, the locked study, the family name spoken like law, all the expensive ways cowardice could dress itself as duty. I chose wrong, he said. Yes, Lena replied. The clean honesty of it was almost a relief. He nodded once. Yes. Another silence followed. But it was no longer the raw silence from before. It had changed shape. It now held history being examined instead of merely survived. Lena rested her forearms on the table. I want to know something. Anything. Why keep looking? She asked. Not because it sounds noble. William looked down at his hands. For once, the answer did not need searching. Because leaving you destroyed the story I told myself about who I was, he said. For a while I tried to outrun that. Work, money, travel. None of it fixed anything. He raised his eyes to hers. Then one day I realized the reason I couldn't move on was because you had. Or I thought you had. And I had to know whether you were safe, whether the baby was real, whether I had imagined the whole thing because I was too ashamed to live with it. Lena didn't interrupt. When I found proof Annie existed, he continued, I couldn't stop after that. I told myself I was only checking from a distance, that I didn't deserve more. But the truth is, he swallowed, the truth is I loved a child I had never met because she was yours, and because she might also be mine. Lena looked down at the table, her hand, resting near the salt shaker, curled slightly inward. A long moment passed. Then she asked, do you want to be part of her life because she's your daughter? Or because you can't forgive yourself? The question was so exact it left no room for performance. William let it sit between them before answering. At first, he said, maybe both. His voice stayed steady. But when she handed me that phone and looked at me with your face, it stopped being about guilt. He glanced toward the hall. Now it's about her. Lena followed his gaze. The apartment seemed to breathe around them. Finally, she stood and moved to the sink, rinsing out her own empty mug though she had never made tea. It was something to do with her hands. When Annie was 3, she said without turning, she got the flu so bad I had to carry her to urgent care at 2 in the morning because the buses had stopped running and I didn't have money for a cab. Halfway there, she was burning up and crying and asking if I was going to let her fall. Lena shut off the tap. That's what this is for me. Every part of it. I am still carrying the child who asks if I'm going to let her fall. William stood too. I know. She turned then, and her eyes were bright, though no tears had spilled. No, she said softly. You know now. I've known the whole time. He took that in. All of it. The solitude of her fear. The sleepless years. The unglamorous courage. Then Lena drew a long breath and made a decision. Tomorrow is Saturday, she said. Annie likes the park on 116th in the morning. We go most weeks unless it rains. William did not move. She'll think you just came because you know me, Lena went on. For now, that's enough. You can sit with us. You can talk to her. You can listen. Her voice sharpened slightly. You will not buy her things. You will not try to impress her. You will not promise anything you have not already done. I won't. If she asks to see you again, we'll deal with that when it comes. Hope rose in him so quickly it almost hurt. He kept his face still, not wanting to frighten the moment away. What time? He asked. 10. I'll be there. Lena held his eyes for one final measure of the man before her. Then she nodded once. All right. William moved toward the door, stopping only when he reached the threshold. He looked back at the small apartment, the drawings, the narrow hall, the life he had found too late but perhaps not too late to honor. Lena, he said. She waited. Thank you. Her expression did not soften, but something in it quieted. Don't thank me yet, she said. Just show up. William gave the smallest nod. Then he stepped into the hall carrying his phone, his guilt, and the first real invitation he had ever been given to become the man Annie Brooks might one day call father. The hallway outside Lena's apartment smelled faintly of old paint and radiator heat as William Carter stepped out into the night. He closed the door gently behind him. For a moment he stood there without moving. 6 years. 6 years of searching through quiet records, investigators' reports, and fragments of public posts had led him to that door. And now, suddenly, he had been invited back, not forgiven, not welcomed, but allowed, and sometimes that was the only kind of second chance life offered. William walked slowly down the narrow staircase, his hand sliding along the worn wooden railing. The building creaked softly with the ordinary sounds of people living close together, televisions murmuring behind thin walls, a baby crying somewhere upstairs, someone washing dishes in a kitchen nearby. Ordinary life. The kind of life he had never imagined Lena would be forced to build alone. Outside, the cool air of the evening wrapped around him again. The street was quieter now. The restaurants along the block had begun filling with dinner crowds, their windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky. William paused on the sidewalk. Across the street, a young father knelt beside a little boy who was struggling to tie his shoe. The boy laughed when the knot finally held. The sight made something deep in William's chest tighten. That should have been me. Not just today. All those years. He looked down at the phone still in his hand. The screen lit when his thumb brushed it. The same photograph appeared again. Him, Lena. A summer afternoon frozen forever. For a moment he considered changing it, replacing the image with something more recent, something less painful, but he didn't. Some memories were meant to hurt. They reminded a man what he owed the world. He slipped the phone into his coat pocket and began walking. His car waited at the end of the block, a sleek black sedan that stood out sharply against the modest row of parked vehicles around it. The driver, Thomas, straightened when he saw him approach. "You're later than expected, sir." William opened the back door, but didn't get in immediately. "Yes," he said quietly. Thomas studied him for a moment. He had worked for the Carter family long enough to recognize when something had changed. "Everything all right?" William looked back toward the apartment building one more time. "No," he said. Then, after a pause, "But it might be." He slid into the back seat. "Home, sir?" Thomas asked. William shook his head. "Not yet." The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Where to?" William leaned back against the seat, exhaustion settling into his bones for the first time all day. "Just drive," he said. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb and merged into the slow evening traffic. As the city lights moved past the window, William found his thoughts drifting back through the conversation in Lena's kitchen. Children build themselves out of what they think their parents are. The sentence had lodged itself firmly in his mind. For 6 years, Annie Brooks had been building herself without him, without knowing whether her father was good, bad, weak, strong, kind, or cruel, without knowing whether she had inherited something worth being proud of. Tomorrow would be the first time she would see him in daylight, not as the man who lost a phone, not as the stranger who knew her mother, but as something else, something uncertain, something fragile, the beginning of a truth. The car turned onto a wider avenue, the skyline opening ahead of them in glass and steel. William's phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He pulled it out. 3 missed calls, all from the same name, Arthur Carter, his father. William stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "What?" His father's voice came through the line, calm and precise. "I hear you've been asking questions again." William leaned back in the seat. "And? You know what happens when old mistakes resurface," Arthur Carter said. "They damage things. I'm not worried about damage. You should be." The voice carried the same authority that had once controlled every decision in William's life. But something inside William had changed since the last time they spoke. "Good night, Father," he said calmly, and he hung up. The driver glanced at him in the mirror again. "Everything okay, sir?" William watched the city lights sliding past the window. "No," he said quietly. Then, after a moment, "But it will be." Across the city, in a small apartment on 112th Street, Annie Brooks slept beneath a blanket covered with tiny cartoon stars. Her hand rested near her pillow, and on her small finger, the silver ring caught the faint glow of the streetlight coming through the window, the ring that had once been a promise. Tomorrow, for the first time in 6 years, the man who made that promise would try to keep it. Saturday morning arrived with a pale blue sky stretched over Manhattan and the kind of crisp autumn air that made the whole city feel newly washed. William Carter had been awake since 5. He had tried reading the financial reports his assistant sent overnight. He had answered 2 emails, ignored 6 more, and stood for 10 full minutes in front of his closet before realizing he was thinking about what kind of sweater a 6-year-old might find less intimidating than a suit. In the end, he chose dark jeans, a navy coat, and a plain gray pullover. No tie, no driver standing nearby, no sign of the billionaire the city knew. Still, when he caught his reflection in the mirror before leaving, he looked like a man trying not to appear as if he were trying too hard, which, he thought grimly, was exactly what he was doing. The park on 116th Street was already alive when he arrived a few minutes before 10. Mothers with strollers moved along the walking path. A pair of older men sat on a bench with paper cups, arguing amiably about the Yankees. A grandfather in a knit cap pushed a little girl on a swing while she squealed toward the bright branches overhead. William stood near the iron fence, hands in his coat pockets, and felt more nervous than he had before the biggest investor meetings of his life. This mattered in a way those meetings never had. This was not about strategy. This was about whether a little girl smiled when she saw him. At exactly 10 past 10, Lena appeared at the far end of the path with Annie skipping beside her. William saw them before they saw him. Lena wore a brown coat and a knitted scarf, her hair tucked back loosely. Annie had on a bright red jacket, leggings, and little boots that flashed silver when she ran ahead and doubled back again. Her braids bounced beneath a knit hat with two small pom-poms on top. For one suspended second, William simply stood there and watched them coming toward him. There was something devastating about the ordinariness of it. A mother and daughter heading to the park on a Saturday morning. A routine, a life, and he was standing at the edge of it, waiting to see whether he would be permitted to step in. Annie spotted him first. "There he is," she shouted, as if finding him there was the most natural thing in the world. Then she ran the last few yards. William barely had time to brace himself before she stopped in front of him, slightly breathless, smiling up with bright expectation. "You came." He felt the words hit somewhere deep and private. "I said I would," he answered. Annie nodded solemnly, as if filing that away. Lena reached them a second later, not out of breath but watchful. Her eyes met William's. He saw relief there, not because she wanted to see him, because he had done the one thing she had asked. He had shown up. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," Lena replied. Annie tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Can I go to the swings?" Lena glanced at William once, then back at Annie. "You stay where I can see you." "Yes, ma'am." The little girl darted off toward the playground with the focused urgency children reserve for joy. For a moment, William and Lena stood side by side, watching her weave through the other kids and head straight for an open swing. "She remembered," William said quietly. Lena kept her eyes on Annie. "She remembers everything." There was no accusation in the sentence, just truth. William nodded. "I'm beginning to understand that." Annie pumped her legs hard and rose higher, laughing when the swing carried her forward into the cool air. Another girl about her age called out to her from the next swing, and within seconds they were speaking in that easy, temporary intimacy children form with strangers. Lena folded her arms against the morning chill. "She likes this park because it's big enough to feel adventurous and small enough that I can still find her quickly." William glanced at her. "That sounds like something you've tested thoroughly." A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. "That sounds like motherhood." He looked back toward Annie. "I don't know much about that world." "No," Lena said. "You don't." The words should have stung more than they did, but there was less edge in them today, perhaps because he was standing where he had promised to stand. After a few minutes, Annie came running back. "There's a girl named Tasha and her grandma said I can use the blue chalk after her," she announced, as if continuing a conversation no one else knew had begun. Then she looked up at William. "Do you want to see me do the monkey bars?" "I do." Annie grinned and ran back off before either adult could add another word. William watched her reach, swing, miss, recover, and laugh at herself without embarrassment. He found himself smiling before he realized it. Lena noticed. "She gets that from me," she said. "The laughing when things go wrong, the refusing to quit in public." William looked at her, and for one brief moment something old and almost warm passed between them. Then it was gone. Annie's voice called from across the playground. "Mama, watch this." Both adults turned immediately. Annie jumped down from the last bar and landed awkwardly, stumbling a little before catching herself. William had already taken one step forward. Lena saw it. So did he. They both stopped at the same time. Annie straightened and raised both arms triumphantly. "I did it." "You did," Lena called back. William felt something strange move through him. Not only pride, instinct. The body remembering a role it had never gotten to play. He exhaled slowly. Lena glanced sideways at him. "You move fast." I wanted to make sure she was all right. Lena's expression remained neutral, but her voice softened slightly. "She usually is." They began walking slowly along the edge of the playground fence while Annie moved on to the chalk area. Children knelt on the pavement drawing crooked rainbows and misshapen houses. Annie immediately crouched beside them and began sketching with determined intensity, tongue peeking out slightly at the corner of her mouth. William watched everything, the way she tucked one boot beneath her, the way she switched colors without hesitation, the way other children seemed to like her almost instantly. "She's confident," he said. Lena nodded. "I worked hard for that." He heard more in that answer than the words themselves. Confidence didn't grow by accident in a little black girl with no father at school events and a mother working double shifts. It had been planted, protected, and watered. built deliberately against a world that would be happy to thin it out. What is she like? William asked after a moment. Lena glanced at him. What do you mean? Books, foods, cartoons, things she hates, things that scare her. He kept his voice low. I want to know. For the first time that morning, Lena looked at him fully, not as a threat, not as a wound, as a man asking for a map. She loves library day, Lena said. Hates peas unless they're hidden in rice. She gets quiet when she's worried, not loud. She still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit she pretends she's too old for. She likes the color yellow this month, but last month it was green. She doesn't like thunder, but she'll act brave if someone else is scared. William listened like a starving man being handed bread. He held every word. Thank you, he said. Lena looked back toward Annie. Don't thank me. Remember it. A few minutes later, Annie came running back with blue chalk dust on her fingers. Look, she said, pointing behind her. On the pavement was a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a sun much too large for the page. William's throat tightened. Who's that? He asked, though he already knew. That's me, Annie said, pointing to the smallest figure. That's Mama. Then she pointed to the tallest one and looked up at him. That one's you. Neither adult spoke. Annie seemed not to notice the weight of what she had done. I made your hair too dark, she said apologetically. The chalk didn't have fancy gray. William let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Lena lowered her eyes for a moment, and when she looked back up, there was something fragile in her face he had not seen in years. Hope, perhaps, or fear of hope. Annie tilted her head at William. Do you like it? He looked at the chalk drawing again. 3 figures. Simple, uneven, earnest. A child's idea of belonging offered without contract, ceremony, or permission. Yes, he said quietly. I like it very much. Annie beamed. Then, as casually as if she were asking for another turn on the swings, she said, Can you come next Saturday too? Lena's head turned sharply toward William. The whole morning seemed to gather around that single question. William looked at Annie, then at Lena, then back at the little girl whose life had already been shaped by one promise broken long before she could speak. He chose his words with great care. If your mama says yes, he said, then I'd like that very much. Annie accepted the answer and ran back to her drawing, satisfied. William remained still. Beside him, Lena let out a breath so quiet he barely heard it. He did not look at her right away. When he finally did, she was already watching him. And this time, what passed between them was not memory. It was the beginning of trust. The chalk drawing stayed on the pavement long after Annie ran back to the playground. William stood beside Lena near the fence, both of them looking down at the 3 uneven stick figures Annie had drawn. The sun above them was far too large, the arms far too long, but the meaning of the picture was unmistakable. A child had drawn the family she believed might exist. William felt the weight of that simple drawing more than any contract he had ever signed. Children build themselves out of what they think their parents are. The words Lena had spoken the night before echoed again in his mind. Annie returned a few minutes later, breathless from running. Tasha's grandma says we can play tag, she announced. Stay where I can see you, Lena reminded her. I will. The girl dashed away again, her red jacket flashing between the climbing bars and the slide. William watched her go. She trusts people easily, he said quietly. Lena nodded slowly. I try to teach her kindness without letting the world take advantage of it. That's a difficult balance. It is. For a moment they simply stood together in the mild autumn sunlight, watching Annie weave between the other children. Then Lena spoke again. You handled that question well. William glanced at her. Which one? Coming next Saturday. He let out a slow breath. I meant what I said. I know. Lena looked down at the chalk drawing once more. She notices everything, she added. Like you said yesterday. Yes. William hesitated before speaking again. Lena, when she drew that picture, does she usually include a father? The question was careful, respectful. Lena folded her arms against the breeze. Sometimes, she said after a moment, and sometimes the third figure is a teacher, sometimes a neighbor. Once it was a firefighter she saw helping someone on the street. William nodded quietly. And today? Today, Lena said, she drew you. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Across the playground, Annie burst into laughter as another child chased her around the slide. William watched the scene carefully. A small girl with energy, curiosity, confidence. A life he had missed but could still help shape. I won't rush this, he said finally. Lena glanced at him. I know you won't. How can you be sure? She studied his face for a moment. Because you're listening. The simple answer stayed with him. For years, William Carter had been known as a man who talked people into decisions. Negotiated, persuaded, directed entire companies with a few well-placed words. But here, none of that mattered. Here, listening was the only currency that counted. Annie came running back again, cheeks flushed from the cold air. "Mama, look." She held out her hands, which were now covered in bright blue chalk dust. "I helped draw the ocean." Lena smiled faintly. "I can see that." Then Annie turned to William. "Do you know how to draw sharks?" "Not very well," he admitted. "That's okay. Mine look like pickles." William laughed. "Then I think mine will fit right in." Annie grabbed his hand without hesitation and pulled him toward the chalk drawings. "Come on." William glanced briefly at Lena. She gave a small nod. It wasn't permission exactly, but it wasn't refusal either. So he followed Annie to the pavement where several children were drawing large shapes in blue and green chalk. "Here," Annie said, handing him a piece of white chalk. "This can be the shark teeth." William crouched beside her. The ground felt cold through his jeans as he leaned forward and began sketching a crooked shape inside the ocean. "Like this?" he asked. Annie studied it carefully. "That's not a shark." "No? That's a dolphin." "Well," he said thoughtfully, "perhaps it's a very confused shark." Annie burst into giggles. Even Lena, watching from the bench nearby, couldn't stop a small smile from appearing. The moment lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. William drew another line, letting Annie correct him each time. Soon there were waves, 2 fish, and something that might have been a sea turtle if one looked at it with generous imagination. When Annie finally stood up again, she looked extremely satisfied. "See?" she said proudly. "Now the ocean has animals." William brushed